Alright, so the last part of this particular section walks us through these things that your textbook talks about as themes of biology. And a lot of it really is actually tied back to those characteristics of living things, with a couple of extra additions, right? So we'll talk biological systems. Remember, life is all ultimately based on cells, so what's that cellular basis look like? Form and function, so on and so forth. So, first off, when we talk biology, so much of what we're dealing with has to deal with these systems. So a combination of parts that are ultimately forming this complex organization. We can talk about ecosystems, we can talk about organ systems. Food webs are systems, but they're all these complex parts that ultimately have to work together in just the correct way for the entire system to function. So if I'm talking something like the digestive system, I've got all these intricate parts. Your salivary glands, your tongue, your pharynx, your liver, your stomach, your intestines, all of these organs, and if those organs aren't functioning properly, or even just if one small piece of that system isn't working, it's going to have an impact on the entire system as a whole. Think about ecosystems. If I am pumping excess CO2 into a particular ecosystem, that's one component to the function of that system as a whole, and it's going to affect all of the other processes that are going on in that ecosystem. So there is a lot of interplay between parts in biology that when one doesn't work, it's got a domino effect on the other. Or even if it's working well, it's keeping everything else running smoothly. So we know that the smallest unit of a living thing is the cell, right? So in order for an object to be considered living, one of the characteristics it has to meet is that it is in fact made of cells. So whether it's single-celled and that is the cell that makes up that entire organism, or we talk about more complex organisms, multicellular organisms like us, those cells are then specialized. And regardless, single-celled or multicellular, any particular cell is very much going to drive the way that that particular piece of the organism or the organism as a whole functions. It's what ultimately performs the life processes that make that organism work. And they're really tied form to function. So we can talk about an organism like you, things like your eyeball or your ear or your hand, and the fact that the form in which those things take allows you to be able to see and interpret sight information, to touch and be able to interpret that pressure and that texture. But we go all the way down to the cellular level, and the same thing's going to be going on there, where I've got a particular neuron and it's shaped the way it is and has organelles specific to the job that it does. Muscle cells, for example, are another one. You've got lots and lots of mitochondria in a muscle cell. Why? Because it needs lots and lots of energy. Mitochondria is the organelle that drives the energy production, versus a plant cell that now has chloroplasts because its job is to take in sunlight, do photosynthesis, and make energy for the plant. So one of the things I encourage you to do as we move through the school year is really to take and pay attention in the back of your head to what sort of function does this structure do for that living thing, and why does it have the form it does in order to do that job. Ultimately, every organism's job really in its ecosystem is to reproduce and to pass on its genetic information, to have that inheritance occur. So every organism that ultimately does reproduce and create offspring, those offspring will then resemble that parent. Why? Because of the information that that parent is passing on in the form of genes or DNA. So why do you look like a combination of your parents? Well, because you've got a combination of genetic information that both mom and dad have given you. And so you are now that combination of their genes. This is going to become a really big topic when we get to evolution, because in order for evolution to happen, these organisms have to reproduce and they have to be passing on this genetic information. We also have to be able to respond to our environment as individual organisms, and then ultimately this will also play a big role in a bigger picture on the evolution side of things. So we're talking about a stimulus response cycle. So as a living thing, you're responding to stimuli all the time. Whether that stimulus is light, temperature, pain, sound, interactions with other organisms, changes of the season, think migration. Alright, all of these are interactions that organisms have with their environment. If we talk about you, I flip the lights on after you've been sitting in a dark room, your response to that stimulus is to sort of close your eyes, maybe cover your eyes with your hands, because your body has to respond to those changes in light level. Give it a few minutes, and eventually your pupils dilate, they get big, they constrict, they get smaller, and you're able to take in less light into your eyes to adjust for that increase in light level in your surroundings. The opposite happens when we turn the lights off, right? It takes you a few minutes to adjust as your pupils dilate or get bigger now so that they can let in the light that is available. Most kids get the temperature, right? You go out in 95-degree heat. What are you going to do after a few minutes? Start sweating to try and cool your body down. Go out in the middle of the winter, and the exact opposite happens. You need to now warm up, and so you start shivering. And even if we look at the environment as a whole, you're interacting with that environment as well. So think about your nutrient cycles, right? Elements like carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, they're constantly being exchanged and manipulated between organisms and their environment. So we're breathing in carbon dioxide. Scratch that, we're breathing out carbon dioxide. Plants are taking in the carbon dioxide, making oxygen, and we have this whole cycle that goes on from there.